Hey Pam, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
No, I muted myself.
Okay.
Was just making noise over here.
It looks like we've got most of the attendees on the call. We could probably go ahead and get started.
Okay. We have slides today to aid the discussion. As an update to our previous meeting, which is really an orientation for the CDE steering committee. The agenda today is to just overview the project very quickly to remind everyone what we're doing and why. To look at the CDE work groups and the work group process that we went through to invite work group members, and then the anticipated process that they'll use to identify data elements in each therapeutic area, and then look at the in-person meeting details for the February in-person meeting. Just as a look back, this is basically how it's set up for this project, with an executive steering committee with representatives from multiple organizations, the CDE steering committee, all of you today, and then the therapeutic areas for each specific in each work group. So epidemiology, pre-hospital, acute hospital, rehab. We recognize that there might be a need to institute another work group, and so that would happen as this committee decided it was required. This is a high-level overview of the scope of work, and you can see we've coded it. Red has actually been completed, blue is yet to occur. So we're at having established work groups and to validate the basic CDEs. We have the in-person meeting scheduled in February, but it hasn't occurred, so I left it blue. And then the rest of the items that are going to occur through the scope of work are there. This high level does not present the meat of what the work groups are going to be doing, or even the CDE steering committee. There's that level of detail isn't here. We wanted to just remind and sort of talk about the fact that we're going to use the CDE terminology or leveling that FITBR does in regards to what is a core CDE versus what is a basic CDE. So the core CDEs is going to be that common data element, a set of common data elements that collects essential information applicable to all studies and would be required to be collected, versus the basic set, which would still be common data elements, but they would be collected in each therapeutic area. And that's essentially how FITBR is set up, with general core, and then they've got, in their case, they have disease-specific basic CDEs, and we've started with therapeutic specific CDEs. And the reason that we put this in here is to try to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as where this work is versus where it could eventually go, with maybe further on down the line, we'd have supplemental CDEs or other CDEs that were related to specific injury patterns, because I know that comes up in conversation a lot. So this work is really, this particular work is really at the higher level of the core CDEs and the basic CDEs for therapeutic areas. But I anticipate over the next year and a half, we'll have lots of discussions about the way forward in the future of this repository. The center staff, along with the executive steering committee, have done some work in order of precedence. In other words, when you decide that you want to collect a data element, how are we going to determine what's going to be the best data element and definition to use? And so really, because this project is to align with FITBR, looking at the data element and looking to see if it is a common data element defined in FITBR would be the first step. So if you wanted to collect eye color because you thought it was super important, then is there a common definition in FITBR for eye color with permissible values, et cetera? And if not, Then we would move to the NTDB as the next level, and then the NINDS and other BRICS instances, followed by NIH. They have certified common data elements as well, and then the cancer registry, just because it's really big. Any comments on that? We felt like we really needed to have a way to sort of discern and decide in what order of precedence we would accept a already existing common data element if it was there for the data element we chose to collect.
Just
Yes,
one
ma'am.
comment on that previous slide. Just to note that the NINDS common data elements for TBI, FITBR, FITBR refers to that collection of common data elements as well.
Yes.
So that might be a little bit, higher up in the priority if need be, because FITBR directly pulls from NINDS TBI common data elements as well.
It does. And there are some other NINDS common data elements that I have found that are not necessarily in FITBR, but would be of potential benefit within the realm of trauma. So I agree, but we'll look at all of them.
Thank you.
Yep.
There's a question in the chat from Dr. Call. He's asking, are there data elements that FIPR and NTDB disagree on?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just going to ask about, because the issue is going to be, although I totally agree that FITBR should be our gold standard, that's going to be really problematic for number one, archiving studies that are currently in existence or have already been completed, but also going forward because NTDB is unequivocally the data dictionary that all of our trauma centers are using. And so I just worry that if there are a lot of discrepancies, have we had a chance to inventory that at all? Does anybody know?
So we haven't had a chance to inventory it specifically because it's a lot of data elements. Like I don't know if we want to inventory the entire NTDB against FITBR, or if we're only talking about the core set, we need to decide what that core set is going to be first, and then do that inventory. I can tell you right now that the difference, having looked at both of them years ago, the difference is going to be in the permissible values, and that is going to occur probably in like discharge location or some such thing like that. That's where there probably will be some discrepancy. But I believe that comparison and that discussion should occur once we identify the data elements that you think are needed and necessary as a core data element set, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I think it makes perfect sense. Definitely want to hear other people's opinions. I want to make sure that we're not committed to FITBR being the definition that we haven't already decided that's the definition we're going to use without having to take a look to see how much discrepancy there may be between that and NTDB.
Right. Dr.
McCall, it totally makes sense to me from a process perspective.
Yeah.
Is it possible just to go back to that flow chart?
Yes.
So directly to answer Deb's, I think, question, also, I think it definitely makes sense to look at FITBR, and if they are applicable, then you got something that's good. But if it doesn't make sense for the particular area of research that you're looking at, then it makes sense to continue on through this flow chart or workflow. The other thing I did want to note, and it's more just of a detail, the NLM repository actually will often consume both NINDS and CADSR data elements within their search capability. It's not always up to date. So yeah, it's good to make sure that you hit the other sites as you show here. But I didn't want it to be confused, because if you go to NLM repository and you search for something, you will see a lot of CADSR.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. And the other thing I did want to point out, Olga Volk, who is part of this group here, has extensive expertise in both NINDS data elements. She's spent a couple of years working at NCI recently, and she's also has extensive FITBR. So she is a good resource to help you figure out what is the, are there data elements that already exist? And if not, also how to build new data elements. My 2 cents.
Yes, yes. I left her off the slide because her name was going to be under number 1, number 3, number 4, number 5, and I thought it was overkill. So I just sort of went with what we have. But yes, she's our go-to resource for all of that.
Great.
Totally understand. And to your point, Dr. Stein, this is sequential in look, but not in adoption. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Thank you, Monica. Appreciate
right?
it.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a good discussion about that at the executive committee as well. So that was very clear. All right.
Hey, can I just
Yes,
Travis Paul, can I just add one thing? So
absolutely.
so I also want to make sure, that we are, as we build this, we should be building it for the future, rather than trying to accommodate. Previous studies should inform the effort and inform what the most appropriate CDEs are to include. But we shouldn't spend a lot of time trying to build something that we can shove the round pegs of previous study into the square holes that we're building. There's other ways that we can archive the previous work in the meta repository.
Yes.
And so I just want to make sure we should be building the optimal state with maximal alignment between FITBR and NTRR moving forward, but not necessarily to ensure that we can put the previous studies into that. We will try where appropriate, but the others we will archive in a different way so that they are accessible.
Yes, yes, we've been on the center side, we've been working through a process of sort of figuring that out in a way that the committees will be able to evaluate legacy studies for that exact reason as to which ones would be worth putting in, and which ones would not. So the next set of slides goes over the CDE work groups and the process. If you'll remember, we talked with all of you and got recommendations from members here on this committee for additional participants to help us with the work groups. And those, the makeup of each of those work groups has really come across quite nicely as far as being multidisciplinary subject matter experts, and really worked on people with differing opinions and even different geography, right? East Coast, West Coast, middle of the country, that kind of a thing, because their practice is a little bit different and the people they see are different. So that has worked out quite well. Those work groups will start meeting every 4 to 6 months by Zoom to work on their own basic data elements that they think are important for their therapeutic area. The first work group is epidemiology. Congratulations, Dr. Gurney, for accepting as chair. And you see the rest of the list of participants here. And Olga, I didn't leave you out. You're on every single slide from here going forward. Nick Madrano for center staff, he will be the lead for that work group, and their orientation meeting is scheduled on January 17th. This is a workflow that we anticipate using. There's probably still going to be a couple edits to this. I don't think that Olga's had a chance to look at it yet. But essentially, we would refine, the center staff would review the core CDE selected by the CDE steering committee. That's really talking about the very first core set, looking at FITBR and what was originally an NTRR, and determining if there are any FITBR core CDEs that fit or are needed into NTRR, the version 1. And this work group's going to review that set and determine what are going to be the overall core CDEs going forward. And that will actually be presented and discussed heavily at the face-to-face. They're also going to be looking at epidemiology basic CDEs. Are there other CDEs for epidemiologic type trauma studies? And if so, what would those be? And make recommendations to the steering or to this committee as to what the basic CDEs for epidemiology type studies might be. For each of these work groups and each of these sets of common data elements, we'll be reviewing multiple sets of data to come up with data elements that are collected commonly. Not common data elements, but data elements that have been collected commonly so that each work group has a set of data elements in their frequency of collection to start from. This work group will be looking at basic epidemiology, CDEs and NINDS, and any other epidemiologic type studies that we can find. We would look at to see what were the data elements collected there. The next work group, is pre-hospital with Dr. White as chair and Lizette Villarreal as the center staff. Their orientation is on the 26th of January. Their workflow is very similar, if not the same. It's just that they will be looking at these initial studies that I've pulled from different locations, AAST, MITC, other conversations and other meetings. Nick has actually started this work of looking at the data elements that have been collected across all of these different studies to determine what pre-hospital data elements are being collected and how frequently they're being collected so that you have a place to start in the work group as to all these studies or all these different registries are collecting this data. What do you think makes sense for this system? Acute hospital working group led by Dr. Timmons, and I'm staffing that. Our orientation is January 19th. Same workflow, similar studies, but not every study collects pre-hospital data, so they're a little bit different. And there's a lot in acute care, so we have a lot of data to look at. There's some landmark studies we've pulled, which are also in pre-hospital. And then I went through the East site and AAST site and pulled as many CRFs as I possibly could. There are other studies that will really be asking the work groups specifically to say, what are the studies that are missing? What are the big studies that you know of that we need to look at? But that'll be done from work group to work group. Unless you have a great idea today, I'll take it. But it's a pretty big list. I'm trying to just get an idea of what those elements would be.
Hey, Monica, the only one I would just add to your excellent list here for both pre-hospital and acute is obviously the track TBI.
Got it.
Which from a FITBR and NINDS perspective is really the key data collection repository right now for TBI here in the United States. Thanks.
Yep, thank you. Rehabilitation and outcomes work group led by Dr. Schuster and will be staffed by Ashley. Their orientation is on January 26th as well. Again, their workflow is similar, but we separated rehabilitation from outcome because rehabilitation data elements is different than outcome tools. So they have basically two sets of work to do. And then these are some of this is a beginning list of what we would be looking at for rehabilitation and outcome. FITBR has basic outcome measures, so that's a great place to start. And then NTRAP actually did, AIM2 was about core outcome measurement set, so we have that to look at as well. And then all of these other systems and anything else that we can find. We have specific rehabilitation people on the work group, which will help uncover other specific rehabilitation studies and what data elements were collected across those studies. That's it for work groups and process and study review or registry repository review. Is there any discussion about that? Any other questions about the data elements and how we're going to get to that very first set for you to look at or process? All right. Further on in the agenda, we have the in-person meeting of this committee, in-person and virtual. Some are attending in that fashion. February 6th and 7th here in San Antonio. And these are the specifics as to what where it's going to be located, travel, and a general timeline. These are the folks that will be attending in person and online. And these are general objectives for that meeting. If you remember, and I don't remember if we covered it in the orientation, but there is a posting of the FITBR core CDEs and the NTRR version 1 core CDEs on the FITBR website for people to review. And we'll be starting with that at this in-person meeting, saying, these are the NTRR core from 3 years ago, 4 years ago. These are the FITBR core, what makes sense going forward, and then moving through that. We'll also look at it again, looking at the NTRR1 core CDEs, deciding whether those make sense, looking at FITBR, adding any of those in as appropriate, and then moving forward we'll discuss data attributes and make sure everybody understands what that means and make some decisions about that. We will review the work group processes and provide any other direction for their work. And I think that's it currently. Michelle, Pam?
Sure. So this is these broad meeting objectives are basically what we proposed in the proposal that we submitted to DoD, but we wanted to bring them to you today to see if there are questions about starting with these core elements and comparing them to FITBR and deciding what works for trauma, as well as what the process is going to be with the work groups, where of course they're focusing on the basic CDEs, but there may be other things that you all would like to add to the agenda. For example, in a call that we had with Dr. Heavner, he brought up questions about, are there certain standards that we want to incorporate into our process? Or are there other things that you think are key to setting our sails correctly and should be on the agenda for this first and only actually in-person meeting of the CDE steering committee?
I'd like to add a note about the orientations. So particularly for the chair people of those orientations, following this meeting, of those work groups, following this meeting, I'll connect you with your center staff person, and we'll start working together on a slide deck that you can use to walk through the orientation. It'll be a standard slide deck with an introduction to the project, because these work group members won't know that much about it. And we will provide the slide deck. The center staff person will support you in everything, and we'll run the meeting, all of that. So you won't need to do much except introduce the discussion and keep it moving.
Would it be possible to get the backgrounds on everybody on our work groups?
Yes, I will send you your list, your work group members. We have collected all kinds of data points on each of them, so you'll know where they're from, what their institution is, all of that. Yes.
Thanks.
Are there other things that you think we should add to the agenda in terms of considerations about how we go about the work? Will we be happy to take any ideas that you may have over the next couple of days? We'll be putting this agenda together and then and circulate it to you all prior to the meeting.
Yes, Dr. McAuliffe.
I had one. Is there to I've been in other working groups over, well, for example, like the NINDS data elements where we had different disease categories and they were each somewhat independently building data elements for the different disease categories. And then we found that there was a lot of duplication across those working groups and that there needs to be some harmonization of those data elements or communication across the working groups to make sure that we're not duplicating data elements so that they're truly more common.
Right. And
Yes.
so one of the things that our staff will be doing is we meet every week. And so we'll be sort of deconflicting lists and reporting back to the committees, like, and also having that discussion of, well, does it make more sense for this work group or this work group to dig into this element? That's a good point.
Also, Dr. Volk is on every single work group, so she'll also be able to help contain that.
I'm not sure who was first, Dr. Huebner or Dr. Let's see.
Uma.
All right, go ahead, please, sir.
Oh, thank you. So I have a question about how are you determining whether, like, the threshold between a core CDE versus one that's more exploratory? Is there a threshold that you're using, and have you thought much about that?
So we haven't spent a lot of time on that yet. Really wanting to stay with the basic or the core CDE and not expanding to exploratory. But I understand your point in your question that there will have to be a discussion rather soon about that. That actually might be a great thing for this group to discuss in person in February. Because there's supplemental, et cetera, within FITBR that we would want to consider as we build this out for the future, is not just core and basic, but the rest of the types. Dr. Gurney?
Yes, and I'm gonna then have to figure out how to lower my hand. I'm on my phone. For the common, so common data elements on the front end and standardization. My question is anybody looking at back end data standardization with like OMOT, common data model, or how to, have the back end data? So for the analysis part of it, putting the back end data into a common data standard.
I might jump in here a little bit. If the data is collected consistent with common data elements, you'll be able to do that cross-study analysis. You don't necessarily need to move it into OMOP, which is kind of a common data model made up of common data elements.
Okay, yeah.
It's only if you had other data sets that were in OMOP and then you have ours, that you wanted to somehow harmonize that data to do analysis. But I haven't heard that as a use case as of yet.
I would only add to that, this is part of what I believe Michelle talked about. I talked with them, and when I met with them, is the piece about common data models that we probably need to think about is the micro schemas around some of the elements, and making sure that we have a clearly documented relationship between the CDEs, and we have the supporting information to make sure it is fully interoperable. So I agree with Dr. McHale that we do not need a full CDM. I think we need to think some about the ontology there. The one other question that I have a hand up just a minute ago, I put it down prematurely. Wanted to ask about the scope. I mean, similar to thinking about the back end, how far into the front end do we actually want to think about? I mean, do we want to get into thinking about the feasibility of actually extracting or abstracting these data elements, or differentiating between those that would be prospective data collection where we're actually engaging with the patient versus those that would be retrospective extraction or abstraction from the EHR, for example? How deep into that do you want this group to get?
That portion is not currently part of the scope of work, but definitely needs to be discussed as follow-on.
Thank you.
Yes. Olga, you had your hand up.
Oh, yes. So I have a very small comment regarding core CDEs. It would be nice if we put an objective to keep the count of core CDEs really small. Like we can expand them, but at the beginning, like from my experience, we shouldn't have it like more than 20.
Sure. That makes sense. I think, and that's why I put it up, and I try to put that conversation in a lot of these meetings, because if you're really going to look at core that can be collected across all trauma studies, trauma is a really big space. I mean, it's really, really, really big, which means that core set's going to be really, really small. If you want to be able to collect it on patients that, came into the ER, didn't get admitted, came into the ER, got admitted, had a liver laceration, had a head injury, had a spleen, had a femur fracture, that's going to be a small set that's going to intersect all of those kinds of patients. So I totally agree with you. And I think we will definitely move, as we move forward, things will be expanded, but the initial collection or that initial set should be small. Any other discussion or questions, comments?
We have another comment from
sorry.
Wouldn't the core data elements be just the data elements that overlap between the smaller working groups?
Yes, probably. They would be. And they should be, but there might be something else that is thought of that the work groups didn't think of. So we would still want to look at those as sort of their own piece of work. But yes. And if we can agree on the core, then the work groups can start with those, knowing that those will be collected on every subject in every study to begin with, and expand to their basic as to what needs to be collected in a specific therapeutic area. They wouldn't have to spend time on the age, person, sex, or whatever those core sets are going to be. Anything else? All right. Well, hearing none, and we are complete. Thank you, everyone, for your time this morning. We'll be sending out the slides. Please, if you have any other suggestions, comments, questions, don't hesitate to let us know, and we'll get right back to you about that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.